In this video, we're going to start taking a look at some of the characteristics of these different groups of members of the Protist kingdom out there. And remember, when we look at these protists, they are being grouped together in what's known as a supergroup. So this would be sort of the equivalent of the kingdom or the phylum level that is out there for these organisms that we're looking at. They do have this weird kind of evolutionary origin, and we think that there are these relationships by looking at the DNA and then comparing them, but we also can see some structural differences between these different groups of organisms. So we'll start out over here with this supergroup known as the Excavata, and there's a couple of different groups of protists that fit into here, including the diplomonads that we'll look at first, that are also known as the fornicates in some classification schemes that are out there. If we look within this order diplomonads that are out there, or the fornicates, we can find some examples of cells that actually have two nuclei, thus the diplo right there, and the monads is another way of referring to the nucleus. And here you can see the two nuclei, and then they've got multiple flagella. And this is our trophozoite of Giardia lamblia that is a common cause of dysentery as a result of drinking fecal contamination that occurred in water. The really interesting kind of features when you look at these cells is they actually lack Golgi bodies and peroxisomes. So again, this would be evidence of an ancestral lineage, or maybe they lost these organelles over time. And what's even more amazing is these organisms actually lack mitochondria. And so they think that maybe the mitochondria DNA actually got moved over into the nucleus, and then the organelle was lost. And these organisms are actually adapted to grow in low oxygen environments. So think about your intestines. Not very much oxygen is available there. So these guys will cause some pretty nasty diarrhea because you get those cysts that are going to be shooting out of the person who is infected, and then those cysts will contaminate the water that is out there. A relative of the diplomonads is a group known as the Parabasalia, and these guys are a little bit different. They do have a single nucleus. They do have multiple flagella, as we can see here, and then this thing, but they also have something that is known as parabasal fibers that are actually going to attach to the Golgi body itself. And similarly to the other ones, they do lack mitochondria, and so they live in conditions that are described as microaerobic, which just means there's low oxygen that is out there. So we'll find them living in the guts of different kinds of animals that are out there. So here you can see a trichonympha that is actually found in termite guts, and on the flagella is actually where the endosymbiont, the bacteria, lives that helps the termites to break down the cellulose. The termite eats wood, but it can't actually digest its food. It needs some of these little guys that are that actually have the bacteria on the flagella right here to actually digest its food there. So really kind of an amazing kind of structure when you look at these. And if you look at Trichomonas vaginalis, yes, this is something that is a parasite for humans, and you can guess where it lives by looking at the name right there. And they're really kind of interesting. They do have this membrane that is very fluid right there. The other thing when you look at them is they do lack the mitochondria, but they have a primitive form of it that's known as a hydrogenosome. It's basically a reduced mitochondria kind of structure. Now, if we look at another group that's related, again, still in that supergroup Excavata, is the phylum here with the Euglena zoa. And if you take a look at that, the zoa part is referencing that they are animal-like. But if you look at the Euglena and you look at this little photomicrograph here, you can see there's a lot of green inside of there. These guys in the Euglena, they are photosynthetic. They can do photosynthesis, and if you look at the cartoon over here, you can see one characteristic is they do have a flagella over here. They do lack cell walls, so they do have that pellicle or skin around the outside, and you can sort of see the bands of the pellicle across the contractile vacuole in that picture right there. The other thing that when they look inside of the cells, the mitochondria are different from what we find in other cells because they're kind of disc-shaped mitochondria. The folds in the membrane give it this disc shape, and other things that are out there, the mitochondria, are more worm-like kind of things. And when we look at this, you can see an example right here of what's known as a trypanosome. It's like the Euglena, but it is lacking the photosynthetic ability there because they don't have chloroplast. And this is something that will actually get inside of you. And here they're in a blood smear right there. And so you can see this is an electron micrograph that's got some false color on it. And you can see the red blood cells and the little trypanosomes right here. And there's two versions of trypanosomes that we typically worry about. One of them that you'll find in Africa will cause sleeping sickness. And this one is actually spread by the tsetse fly. And one that we find in the Americas that has worked its way up from South America through Latin America and is now crossing the border in Texas is Trypanosoma cruzi, and this one causes something known as Chagas disease. And you get it because a little bug will actually crawl up on your face, and it will feed on your blood by basically like a mosquito shooting a proboscis, and it likes to feed around your mouth because you've got a whole bunch of capillaries near the surface in the skin around your mouth. And so imagine you're sleeping, this bug crawls up, it shoots its little proboscis around your mouth, it sucks some blood, and then it's full of blood and it's really heavy, so they turn around and they will deposit some fecal material. Well, inside of the feces are where these little trypanosomes are found. And then you scratch the injury that occurred where they fed on you, and that pushes some of these things deeper into your flesh, and then they can get access to your circulatory system and travel around throughout your body. And they will go into a cyst stage, and they like to do that actually inside the myocardial tissue. So they will basically go dormant in the walls of your heart, and they can lead to congestive heart failure. And ironically, they think Charles Darwin might have actually brought a souvenir home from South America when he was traveling around to get to the Galapagos Island. He stopped off in South America and walked around, and they think that he might have actually had some of these trypanosomes that caused Chagas disease and resulted in heart failure there. All right, switching gears, we'll take a look at another supergroup out there, the chrome alveolata. And these guys are interesting because they have something that is known as an alveolus, which we can see in this electron micrograph. And it's this weird cavity that is just underneath the cell membrane right here. The other thing, when you look at this group, is the mitochondria are going to form long tube-like structures as opposed to discs when you look at the folds there. And within this, we'll take a look at some of these guys up here first for the alveolate group that leads to the dinoflagellates and the apicomplexans. And when we look at the dinoflagellates, there is an electron micrograph and a little cartoon to show you this is another one of those weird groups because these are plant-like cells that can also eat. So again, they're that mixture of plant and animal kingdoms. They do have chloroplasts, and they'll make starches and oils by using photosynthesis. If you look on the surface, they do have cell walls that are made of cellulose. So think a single-celled organism swimming around through the ocean that is using these little flagella to move. But what's amazing about them is they will actually produce neurotoxins, and those neurotoxins can stun their prey so that they can actually consume them by phagocytosis. So animal-like, they're ingesting their food there. When we look at the other alveolates that are out there, the apicomplexans, they're named because they have an apical complex over here. And it's basically this group of organelles that you find on the tip of the infective stage of the organism. And when you look at this, plasmodium is what causes malaria. And so this thing can infect your cells using the apical complex as basically a drill to get into your cells right there. Once they're inside of your host cells, they will go through that process of schizogony to make copies of themselves. So really kind of nasty when we look at them in terms of the infections. So we can find Plasmodium that causes malaria. You might have also heard of Cryptosporidium that causes epidemics of diarrhea, and there you're drinking cysts that are in the water that's contaminated with the Cryptosporidium. And when they get inside, they'll use their apical complex to cause infections in you that are out there. And this is an example of something known as toxoplasma. And this is a cyst. And if you look at all these little things inside of there, those are the trophozoites inside of the cyst. So a whole bunch of these infective things. And you ingest the cyst, you digest off the outside layer, and now you have all these trophozoites inside of you. You can commonly find them on unwashed fruit and veggies and also cat feces. So when you clean out the kitty litter box, the cat has picked up toxoplasma from, say, eating a dead bird that it found outside, and then they poop out the cysts for you to enjoy because they are that kind in wanting to share that with you. Switching gears a little bit, we can take a look at the ciliates that are out there. And these are characterized by having those little cilia, either here we can see with the duodenum or the paramecium, they're all over the surface. And when you look at these guys, again, that idea, they have the macro and micronuclei that are going to be used for that process of conjugation. And the only parasite that we need to worry about that fits in the ciliates is what's known as Balantidium coli, and this will cause intestinal disorders, and it's becoming more and more prevalent when we look at immunocompromised people that are out there. If you get Balantidium coli, it is actually extremely likely to kill you, though. It's not one of those things that you do want to end up getting. And we'll end off this little section here by looking at a really interesting subgroup that is out there that is known as the Oomycetes. And when you look at that mycetes part, these guys used to be classified with the fungus, and it's built into their name because this literally is meaning water molds. And when you look at them, it's kind of interesting because most of them turn out to live on land that are out there. And they can cause things like the Irish potato famine. These guys are decomposers, and they look like molds. If you saw a hairy fish like this, you would think it's got a mold, but it actually has this water mold. And when you look at them and look in a little bit more detail, turns out these guys do have cell walls, but they use cellulose, not the chitin that we find with members of the fungus kingdom. They don't have the septa in between the cells here, so they are aseptate in terms of their structure. And the other really big difference that we find is the cells that you're going to find out there are diploid. And remember, when we looked in the fungus kingdom, they were haploid cells that were out there. And they do produce what are known as zoospores, these little guys here, that have flagella. And so the spores are able to swim around and move around in the water right there. When you looked at spores in the fungus kingdom, they had those protective coating, and basically the water is carrying them around. So even though the common name for these is water molds, they're not always found in the water, and they are definitely not molds. They just physically look like molds that are out there. And in this picture, you can see one that's actually decomposing an insect right there.